So as we work with domestic violence cases, and especially with marriages and the family, there's really four little phrases or words that I like to use to help you to frame where you're going with the counseling process. Just simply, it's face, trace, erase, replace. So if you're going to really help anybody in counseling, but especially in dealing with a domestic violence case, people have to be willing to face the truth about what they've done and essentially who they are as human beings. It's hard to imagine for any of us that we could hurt another person. We don't want to think of ourselves in negative terms. But we have to be willing to face truth, and not their truth or my truth, but the truth. The truth is that your actions do speak louder than words, and that you have done what you have said and done. And there are consequences for that. So you have to help someone face the truth. Now again, how you do that to a great extent is technique, and often determined by how humble, how submissive, how arrogant, how defended or defensive the individual is that you are talking with and confronting. If you have a man that is pretty self-justified, they believe that they were in the right because they were provoked, then to help them to see that what they have done really has damaged another human being, and that they should at least care about that, it can be very difficult. To help a victim to face the fact that they have allowed themselves by their own choices in many ways. Again, we're talking about adults, not children. They've allowed themselves to be in a situation where they could be victimized when they did have other choices to make. To help them face it is not to blame themselves, but it is to accept responsibility for where they're at. You have to face the truth. Those that are able to do that in a reasonable manner, there's some hope that you can help them. If they're going to continue to deny, to project blame and responsibility and try and constantly place it on somebody else, the likelihood of helping them is pretty slim. The face and then trace, there's roots. There's always roots to the problems. And we talked about in the earlier session about the build-up phase, etc. There are roots to why people do what they do. Sometimes they can be generational. They're learned behavioral patterns, especially under stress. Again, that doesn't excuse the behavior, but it helps to explain it. It helps to show to the individual that this is the process that your thinking takes you towards. And once you jump on that train track, it's hard for you to put the brakes on. So you want to interrupt those negative behaviors before the train leaves the depot. So it's kind of, to trace it is to look at what are the roots. Is it rejection? Is it abandonment? Is it betrayal? Is it their own abuse? Are there personality dynamics that are involved? And again, in some cases where you find someone that it's very difficult to determine what's really going on in them, perhaps a referral to a higher level trained individual would be appropriate. In most cases, you can see the results when you simply interview them about what was it like for you growing up? What was your mom and dad like? Is this something you've observed? Do you hang out with a lot of friends that all they talk about is, you got to keep that old lady in place, keep her under control? If that's the kind of environment that they're raised in, and that kind of belief and behavior is continuously reinforced, well, you can begin to see the roots of that. Once you can see the roots, face, erase, or trace, then you can erase. You can begin to come up with interventions, actions, thoughts, beliefs that will help to counteract the patterns that have been established in their life. There's a New Testament scripture. Jesus told a story about sowing and reaping. And there's two kinds of soil. There's good soil, or two types of seed, if you will, good seed and bad seed. Well, the bad seed are words and actions that have been sown into a person's heart over time. And for many of us that were raised in dysfunctional family systems, we've had a lot of negative seeds sown in our hearts, where we have what we reap from that is a harvest of beliefs and attitudes toward people, relationships, etc., that don't breed health but breed death, if you will. And then there's good seed. Good seed speaks of words that are spoken, words that are learned, traits that are developed that are healthy and move us in a positive direction. And so, part of counseling is to sow good seeds ourselves, and not, to help crowd out the bad seeds. So part of erasing is literally building in, well, let me put it this way. Once someone has learned to be angry and aggressive, you don't unlearn it. You know how to do that. You'll always know how to be angry and aggressive. But you can also learn how to be not angry and more responsive in a healthy way. You can learn new behaviors. So it's not like you can somehow uproot what has already been learned. It's that you can learn more functional ways that become stronger and more positively reinforced in a person's life. In other words, if your goal is to be loved and to have a healthy relationship, then building pathways to that, which are positive, is the way that we'll kind of deal with the old negative pathways that have been built into a person's life. So face, trace, erase, and then replace is also kind of, again, teaching those new behaviors. So in some cases, the erase is to confess, if you will. It's to repent, which is a good word, means to change your thinking, and it's to make amends. So really those three things. Confess really speaks about telling the truth about yourself, admitting the truth. In an AA term, we would say, I've become aware, I have to admit, I have to acknowledge my life is unmanageable because of my drinking, my drugging, whatever. My life has become manageable because of my rage, because of my inability to control my words and my actions. I've tried to stop it myself. And in most cases, you'll find that people have tried to stop, to control themselves. They can't. Well, they can, but they can't. They can't find the way to do it. And so my life has become unmanageable because of it. There must be some sort of God, a higher power, some source outside of myself that can help restore me to sanity. And sanity in this case is healthy thinking. And then turning my life over, submitting to God, submitting to that higher power, becomes an essential part of the process of overcoming any addiction, but also really any unhealthy dependency in terms of relationships. So using that model just briefly, I'm kind of introducing that on the side. The fact is that when we are trying to erase something, it starts by confessing, telling the truth, acknowledging the situation as it is. But it also requires a change of thinking, which is the word repentance. It's not beating yourself, it's not punishing yourself, it's not shaming yourself, but it is changing your thinking. And there's thinking how I think about a man, how I think about a woman, how I think about relationship. It has to change. There's a better way to look at things than the way I have. Well, my mom taught me, my dad taught me, irrelevant in the present moment. That may have been even right for them in their life and their circumstance, but it isn't right for us today. So a change of thinking is really, really important. That leads to a change of lifestyle, and in some cases there has to be some restitution. There has to be amends made in order to really build a new and healthy trust. Trust is essential in the relationship. So face, trace, erase, replace. And that's just a way to kind of think about the counseling process, or a way to frame it, if you will. So in rebuilding marriage, you want to keep a few things in mind. That in abuse situations, trust is difficult. Now, if you're coming from a faith tradition, almost all faith traditions will say forgiveness is essential. Yes, but forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. I can forgive you in that I'm not going to hold you accountable for what you've done, but unless I've seen a pretty radical change in your attitudes, beliefs, and actions, words and actions fit together, I'm not going to trust you. I'd be stupid to trust someone that hasn't demonstrated change. So trust has to be earned, and of course one of the difficulties with trust being earned is that in order to earn trust, you have to trust. Okay, and so you build toward little steps to try and develop trust in the relationship. Denial is always very strong in people's lives. I don't want to believe that I could do such a thing, so I didn't. It's not me, it's the devil, it's my mom, it's my dad, it's the culture, it's my poverty, it's this, it's that. All kinds of excuses people can use, but again, denial is very strong and you have to be willing to confront it. You don't want to become a rescuer or a messiah. Don't make promises for any individual or couple that you can't keep. Be careful about those promises. Even in the initial stage of bringing some intervention in a domestic violence case, if you say we're going to get you to a safe place, make sure you know that there's a safe place you can get them to. If you say we're going to pay for a hotel room, well, you're obligated. Make sure you pay for it. If you say you're going to be available for counseling, make sure you're available, or if you can't be, that you line it up for them so that they can receive the help that they need. You want to look to the future with hope. And that's not always easy, because hope is not just a wish, it's not a dream, it's really something concrete. It's based upon a true belief that something is possible. You want to build healthy hope in people that life can be sweet in the future. And always remember that often children suffer domestic violence by simply being in the environment, and they need help as well. So let's look at some other helpful techniques. I'll talk about 5 different ones, and then we'll get into some kind of special areas for you. Number 1, it starts with active listening. Active versus passive. I mean, there's nothing worse than just sitting with someone and they don't respond. Active listening means you're engaged. You listen. You've probably seen in movies, etc., people respond. Someone will say, well, I'm feeling really sad. Oh, you're feeling really sad. Yeah, I'm really, really angry. Well, you're feeling really angry. I mean, that's not really being reflective. You want to reflect with content. So if someone says, I feel so confused, man, this whole situation just doesn't make sense to you. It's really rocking your world. Now, if you've connected with them with emotion in your reflection, their response will be, yeah, I don't know what to do. In other words, they'll be able to express their feelings at an even more, a deeper level, connecting, creating some sense of understanding. You might say something like, tell me more, when you're not quite sure, or they're beginning to tell their story because you want to learn more about the situation. You can always ask questions for clarification, but the key thing is to be active in your listening. And I love what my mama used to tell me years ago. She simply said, Stan, remember there's a reason why God made you with 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you can listen twice as much as you talk. And in the counseling process, that's probably a good adage. About 2/3 of the time, you want to be listening, active listening, and only talk when you really have something significant to say. So part of it then is having effective confrontation. I mean, you don't want to just confront every little thing that you think is not quite accurate. No, it's only things that are truly significant do you want to confront. And even then, your confrontation is not done in an angry way at all, but it's more of, gee, I didn't quite understand, or you said this, but now you're saying this, and I'm not sure which it is. So it's designed for clarification and understanding. Again, in your process, you are looking for the roots, and you're helping them to face responsibility, and ultimately you want to help them to come into a relationship with accountability. That's going to help them to move forward in their life. You know, in many ways, when you're dealing with domestic violence, you're dealing with secrets. Families keep secrets. Healthy families, to be honest, keep secrets. Not everything needs to be shared. What happens behind closed doors happened behind closed doors because the doors needed to be closed in most cases. Nothing sinister, it's just private. We have the assumption of the right of privacy within the Constitution of the United States, and I think most, whether you're a person of faith or not, you would agree that a certain level of privacy in your life is to be expected. I don't want the government telling me how I'm supposed to raise my children. I don't want some counselor to, be in the middle of my marriage. But there are times when secrets become revealed that are unhealthy secrets. And that's where intervention is required. Now, again, families historically have kept secrets because there's often things in the family that are just very unhealthy. But family is all people know. When you're dealing with children especially, it's all they know. They don't know anything but the family that they've been raised in. When there's an issue that happens, especially if there's abuse in the family, everyone collapses together because the preservation of the family is the most important thing. Kids don't want to see their mom or dad sent away from home. It rocks their world. It takes away their stability. And yet, without facing the truth, healing and restoration will not likely ever occur. So the process of breaking through the denial takes skill and sensitivity. I remember working with a couple who were referred to me by a probation department. They were absolutely convinced that the husband had been molesting at least one of the children. When they came in, the wife was trying to be as supportive of her husband as possible. She didn't want to believe that he could have done it, and he was in absolute, very convincingly in denial that anything happened. But the daughter, who happened to be a part of the counseling process as well, was adamant that her dad had actually molested her. A very difficult, counseling session, if you will. So I asked each one of them to share their story a little bit. I started with the person I saw as having the greatest power, which was the man. He shared how I've never done anything like that. I would never do anything like that. I don't know why she would make up that kind of story. The mom shared that, I want to believe my daughter, but I want to believe my husband. I don't know what to do. She was very confused. And the daughter was sad, but also adamant of what had happened. As I listened to the story, a story that I'd heard many, many times, what kind of came to me in the middle of listening to it is, where there's smoke, there's fire. Now, where there's smoke, there's not always fire. Sometimes it's just smoke. But I felt like there was probably some truth in what the young lady was saying, and I said this to the man, where there's smoke, there's fire. I said it several times in the session. And they left. I didn't know what to do. I reported back to the probation department that it's still unclear. We're working on it. The man gave me a call later that week, confessing to me that yes, indeed, he had molested his daughter. And to him, it was the experience that he had was, I felt like I was being smoked out, and I felt so guilty and so ashamed, and I just had to confess. I had to tell it. Well, that opened the door, and we were able to get the daughter some help, and the wife, and sadly, the man did some prison time, and the family didn't survive, but these things happen. And when secrets come out, you're never quite sure what you're going to find. We know for certain that when there's family secrets, that especially negative ones, when they do come out, everyone's going to fight to try and survive what's discovered. So you have to determine, what is the problem here? What are we dealing with? Is it a generational pattern? And oftentimes it is. Past abuse patterns, the triggers that cause the abuse, the communication process that keep abuse in place, all have to be reviewed and discovered and dealt with. Uncovering the roots of bitterness, if you will, in the lives of people is a big part of the counseling process. You have to help deal with the thought patterns. Dealing with clients And the way that they think about themselves and others is difficult because it's internal. The goal is to get them to externalize what they're thinking internally and to do so honestly, which is not always easy. In fact, it's oftentimes very difficult. And you have to kind of work on it to help them, to not try and trick them, but you try and set an atmosphere where they begin to unveil themselves. They kind of unmask that which is hidden in their lives. Dealing with the thoughts is, again, to help to restructure things, to help them to think more clearly. To deal with issues of power is very important, because power, if you have it, you rarely need to use it. It's when you feel like you don't have it or someone's trying to take it from you that you tend to try and use it more vociferously. So you want to deal with all of those things, and that's part of the process, if you will, that brings about cleansing and shame. So ultimately, through talk, through confession, through forgiveness, through letting go of the past, through repentance, again, as we've talked about, dealing with the issues of grief and loss. And we're going to go into that to a much greater level when we talk about crisis in greater depth, and we deal with the whole concept of grief and loss in other videos. But we have the shock and the denial and having to deal with fantasy issues, and finally coming to a place of acceptance in the grieving process. That's all a part of what happens when you're dealing with domestic violence cases. Ultimately, it's helping them to find some new directions. The goal of counseling is ultimately the restoration of the abuser and the victim, if possible. It's coming to a place of truth and teaching them skills to be able to live life together. Forgiveness is always a necessity. And so as you're working with a client and you're trying to help them to deal with their issues, you want to do so with great care. But again, the goal, if you can, is to see restoration in the relationship. In the community at large, we need to take abuse seriously. In a time of crisis, the victim will need a listening ear and understanding, not necessarily advice. The counselor or friend has to be approachable, to realize that they have options and they don't have to be stuck in this situation for the rest of their life. We do help them to take responsibility without placing blame, so that they can act for themselves or take back their own power, to help repair their self-esteem through truth in the counseling process. When you're dealing with an abusing man, the bottom line is the violence must stop. And if they can't stop it themselves, well, that's what the courts are for. That's what jails often are for. Promises must have positive actions. Men will promise almost anything when they're facing the loss of something that they hold precious. You always have to follow up on the abused partner. You can't just have a one-time thing. Now that means not necessarily are you going to continue to help them, but it means to make sure that they get the help they need by having a healthy referral. And ultimately, long-term, you want to establish accountability. The role in the community is to assist repentant, abusive men and or women or teens. You want to help them. You want to see them change. But in order to do that, they have to be willing to accept responsibility. We must break the silence on this issue. The issue happens in every walk of life. It's in the church. It's in the community at large. And, if you're working in this area, it takes courage to step into the middle of these kinds of traumas and crisis. But if you've got the courage to do so, it's a great help and a great blessing to many. Ultimately, the abused mate should see community as a place of refuge. And we're needing to find more and more helpful facilities and programs that will assist people to find that place of safety so they can work through the issues that they face. And ultimately, to teach the abuser and the abused principles of healthy marriage. Well, we're going to end our session here. For those of you that are taking this course, for domestic violence counselor. We do have more sessions involved, and which will be related to the book Crisis Counseling. This book, remember, that you're going to be asked to read is called Patterns of Destruction on Counseling for Victims of Family Violence. There's a study guide that goes with it, which are just end of chapter questions to help you interact with the material. And there's going to be some questions related to the videos that you've just watched. That's a part of the certification process that we've developed in keeping with the requirements of the state of California. So I hope you continue on. Again, the next online course that we're going to be offering will be on crisis counseling. I think you're going to find it to be, there's a little redundancy in terms of what we've covered, but most of it we're going to focus especially on dealing with grief and loss and using some case studies to help you understand how to step into the middle of trauma, how to help both domestic violence cases, but also other traumatic victims, trauma victims, to be able to work through their crisis, come to a place of stability, and be able to embrace life to its fullest.